in just 2 or 3 sentences, why should there be a government role in supporting high growth entrepreneurs? Why are we here, and why is this study important for the World Bank to be undertaking? Erkko, you want to start? Go ahead.
I can start. We followed a cohorts of businesses that were subjected to a high growth policy initiative in Finland. We started data collection 2 years before the initiative started, and this was a high growth initiative. We followed those for 6 years. We controlled for in-selection, out-selection, any selection effects. We found that after controlling for those effects, the initiative had more than doubled the high growth rates of those businesses. It's coming out to research policy in February, already available online.
Okay, so answer number 1 is government should be involved because it can be effective in boosting the growth rates of firms, okay? And so then we still want to know why the growth rates of firms might matter as something of importance to national policy, or perhaps we're just happy with that because it relates to the growth of firms. Next, you guys got a mic down there. Steve, why don't you go ahead? You launched a global entrepreneurship program at the State Department. Now you're at Brookings doing a lot of related things. So why is this an important? As you go to talk to governments and you try to sort of discuss this agenda, how do you describe it in a couple of sentences?
Well, you know, one of the is this working? Yeah. One of the things that I think is really important, and just by way of background, I'm not an academic. I'm an entrepreneur and a business guy who came into this from a very different place. So I don't have the research background that every other distinguished person speaking today does. I just started some companies, but and we did start the Global Entrepreneurship Program at the State Department under Secretary Clinton, and the sort of the combined experience that I've had both as an entrepreneur and looking at it from a public policy standpoint is that not only is government involvement helpful, but it's actually indispensable. And it was a kind of a little bit of a revelation to me, because as an entrepreneur, my instinct would be to stay as far away from the government as possible. And certainly in all of the businesses that I was involved in, which were mostly web-based and major television satellite company that I helped co-found, you know, government was the enemy. And but I think there are a couple of key things that I have learned in the last 5 or 6 years that make government involvement not only helpful but indispensable. The first is that when you look at impediments to entrepreneurship development, especially in developing countries, and there are a great many, and lots of people here are expert about that, and the World Bank has done a huge amount of work on that. But one of the ones that's not talked about very often is, and in my opinion is actually one of the biggest impediments, is corruption. And corruption usually has a very strong connection to government. And those who are most able to extract payment favors from businesses have some connection to the regulatory process in one way or another. So that's a negative impact, but a very, very important impact, especially in developing countries, much more so than in OECD countries. The second is the point that Anne made so ably about scalability. And the same is very true in the United States, as she mentioned, and that is that the largest customer in any economy is always the government. The largest customer, the largest check writer in the United States of America is the US government. And that is magnified in developing countries. In fact, it is magnified so much that in many developing countries, there's almost no private sector other than the government. So if you are talking about scalable entrepreneurship as opposed to cottage industry level entrepreneurship, the government is extremely important both as a customer and as a potential impediment. So those are the two main things I just put out on the table right up front about the role of government in entrepreneurship.
Okay. Wong or Sammy? Go ahead, Sammy. Or Wong. Go, you're both ready, but...
So I think, so the question was, why should government, right?
Yes, yes.
I think, we've seen enough in terms of job creation, innovation, outputs, from research done by people much smarter than I am, that sort of establishes that high growth firms really are very important from a productivity and innovation and jobs and income creation perspective. But there's also another reason, and that's that, is we need to think about sort of a virtuous circle, right? Where government at least supports or doesn't get in the way of high growth firms. And high growth firms can grow and contribute to the tax base. And then that funds public programs that will then build the schools and roads and the institutions that those high growth firms 10 years from now will be able to use, right? So I think the question, or the really interesting question, is how, in my opinion, yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, Wong?
Well, I guess beside my role as an educator, teaching and researching entrepreneurship, I run the university's entrepreneurship center where, among other things, I run an incubator and a seed fund to help professors, students, and alumni to spin up their companies. So obviously, I have to believe that it does make a difference. And secondly, being an angel investor myself, having invested in more than a dozen companies around the world, I can see that very often the angel investing can be a very important part of the ecosystem to support early stage innovative companies. And there, government policy context can make a lot of difference. And finally, in the context of what has been highlighted by Steve, in many developing countries, you have a lot of rent-seeking entrepreneurs rather than a value-creating entrepreneur because of the way in which incentives are being set up, structured by government policy and institutions. And as such, I believe that if one can redirect some of these entrepreneurial energies into value-creating one rather than rent-seeking one, I think economic growth will be increased. I believe that there are always entrepreneurs in any environment. The question is that are these entrepreneurial energy channeled to destructive, rent-seeking activity or to value-creating, innovative activities?